Max woke it to the sound of humming. At first, he thought it was in his dream. A low, soft vibration beneath everything, like a wire stretched too tight. But when he opened his eyes, the living room ceiling was still above him, with its faint, yellow stains spreading outward like a tide mark. The humming was real. His neck ached. He'd slept twisted on the couch again, an arm flung down across the rug, his knees jammed against the armrest. His mouth was sour. His head pulsed in a steady rhythm. He sat up slowly, pressing both palms against his eyes until white bursts of light swam in the darkness. The humming came from the kitchen. Familiar but not. The notes were clipped short, exact, repeating in the same pattern every few seconds. Max shuffled to his feet. His socks brushed against the grain of the wooden floor. The air smelled of coffee and fried butter. In the kitchen, Mara was at the stove. The robe she always wore on weekends hung loose from her shoulders, and her hair was knotted at the top of her head. She moved in smooth, deliberate motions, cracking an egg, tapping the shell once, cleanly, as though she'd practiced. The humming never faltered. The sight of her eased him for half a second. Then he noticed the bottle, his bottle. It sat on the counter beside her elbow, the cap off. A measure poured into the bottom of a glass. Max blinked. "What's that doing out?" His voice came hoarse, rusty. Mara turned. Her face was calm, composed, her eyes warm but flat, like glass warmed by the sun. "I thought it might help your head," she said. She lifted the glass and held it out to him. He hesitated. The words caught him, snagged hard in his mind. Help your head. Mara had never once in their marriage offered him a drink in the morning. For years, she had poured his bottles down the sink, thrown his glasses in the trash, slammed doors, shouted herself hoarse, trying to drag him out of this cycle. But here she was, smiling softly, hand outstretched, glass glinting amber in the morning light. His hand shook as he took it. He swallowed fast, the burn running sharp down his throat. Relief bloomed, immediate and guilty. Mara laughed. It was sudden, a sharp burst that filled the kitchen louder than it should have. Max blinked at her. "What?" he asked. Her laughter tapered into a smile. "Nothing. You always make that same face when it goes down, like a boy stealing from the cupboard." He forced a chuckle. "Yeah, caught red-handed." Mara laughed again, just slightly too long. Then she turned back to the stove, spatula moving in clean, practiced arcs. Max sat at the table, glass warm in his hand. The kitchen looked the same as ever, the pale yellow paint, the tiny crack above the window frame, the chipped mug on the counter. But it all felt deliberate, placed, as if someone had studied the room carefully, then arranged each thing in its rightful spot. The eggs slid onto a plate. Mara set them in front of him, then sat across the table, her hands folded neatly together. "You should eat," she said. He picked up the fork. The eggs were scrambled, a little rubbery, but he ate anyway. Mara watched him. She wasn't eating herself, just watching. "You remember," he said, chewing slowly. "You used to get on me for this." He lifted the glass, said I was killing myself. Mara tilted her head. Her hair brushed her shoulder. "Maybe I was wrong." The fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" Her eyes stayed steady on his. "If it makes you feel better, how could it be wrong?" Max let out a breath, almost a laugh, though it came out strangled. "That doesn't sound like you." "Maybe I've changed." She smiled when she said it. The smile was precise, almost rehearsed. Max pushed another forkful of eggs into his mouth, chewing even though the food turned to paste. Mara folded her hands tighter, fingertips pressing against each other, as though she were holding something fragile in place. He thought of last week, her yelling, her hands shaking as she waved an empty bottle at him, her voice cracking as she said she couldn't keep doing this. That was last week. Now she hummed. Soft, steady, the same clipped pattern as before. Max finished the glass, the burn working deeper into his chest. Mara leaned forward then, eyes bright, and refilled it for him without asking. Her laugh followed, light and sudden, too sharp for the small room. By noon, the day had settled into a dull, grey stillness. Max sat in the living room chair, his phone limp in his hand, news headlines sliding past unread. The air smelled faintly of eggs and whiskey. Mara moved about the house, quiet, her robe whispering as she passed from room to room. Sometimes she appeared in the doorway, watching him with that same warm, steady expression. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, the notes repeating like a looped record. Max tried once to break the silence. "You remember when we painted this room?" he asked, nodding at the pale yellow walls. "You picked the color. Said it looked like sunlight." Mara's lips curved upward. Yes, sunlight. But she didn't look at the wall. She looked at him, and her smile held steady, a little too wide, until he looked away. The afternoon stretched long and flat. The house held its breath. Max drifted between the living room and the kitchen, carrying his glass with him. Mara kept it filled without comment. Sometimes he didn't even notice her move. He'd look down, and the whiskey would be there, fresh ice crackling. By 2 o'clock, he had given up pretending to read the news. The phone lay face down on the table beside him. He leaned back into the chair, staring at the ceiling fan as it ticked a slow circle. His temples pulsed. "You're quiet today," Mara said from the doorway. Max turned his head. She leaned against the frame, robe hanging open just enough to show the collar of her nightshirt. Her arms were crossed loosely, her expression serene. "Just tired," he said. Her eyes softened, but not the way they used to. No crease, no flicker, just a smooth calm. "Then rest," she said. He huffed a laugh. "Rest, drink, repeat, huh? Hell of a cure." Mara laughed too. It startled him. Too quick, too loud for the joke. The sound rattled in the quiet room. She pressed her fingers against her lips as though trying to hold it in, but her shoulders shook once more before she stilled. Max frowned. "Wasn't that funny?" "Wasn't it?" she asked, voice bright, too bright. He looked at her for a long second, then away. "Guess I'm losing my edge." She crossed the room and perched on the arm of his chair. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. The touch was gentle, but there was no weight to it, like the hand was placed there out of obligation, not instinct. "You haven't lost anything," she said. Max tilted his head back, staring up at her. "That's so?" "Of course." Her smile deepened, showing teeth. "You're still you." The words left him colder than he expected. He shifted, reaching for the glass. She lifted it first, placed it in his hand. Her fingers lingered on his for a second longer than usual, cool and precise. "Thanks," he muttered. He drank. Later, as the afternoon dulled toward evening, Max found himself wandering the hall. His head buzzed, the good kind of numb layered over with the faint itch of unease. He stopped outside the bedroom door, half open, the bed neatly made. Mara sat on the edge of it, hands folded in her lap. She looked up when he entered. "You should lie down," she said. "Why?" I'm fine. You look tired. He smirked. Always tired. She smiled in return, but there was no warmth in it. Then, after a pause, she added, I'll lie with you if you want. Max blinked. What's with you today? What do you mean? You're, I don't know, different. Her head tilted slightly, as though the word amused her. Different? Yeah. He rubbed the back of his neck. You're calmer. Usually you'd be on my ass about the bottle, but today you're... He stopped himself. Her smile widened. Supportive. The word sent a shiver through him. Yeah, I guess he tried to laugh it off. Not complaining, just odd coming from you. Mara shifted, patting the mattress beside her. Then let me take care of you. He hesitated. Something in her tone. It was sweet, yes, but off-key. Like a violin tuned just a hair sharp. I'm good, he said finally. He backed out of the doorway. Her eyes followed him, steady, her smile never fading. By the time the sky outside bruised into evening, Max had settled back in the living room. He tried to focus on the television, an old sitcom with canned laughter. But every time the laugh track burst, it blended too easily with Mara's earlier laughter, sharp and echoing. Mara came in with a bowl of popcorn. She set it on the table, then lowered herself onto the couch beside him. Her body angled toward his, her knee brushing his leg. Remember this one? She asked, nodding toward the screen. Max glanced over. Not really, she laughed, too loud again. You always forget. He forced a chuckle. Guess I do. Her hand slipped into his, fingers lacing. The gesture should have comforted him. Instead, it felt rehearsed, exact, as though she had studied the action in a mirror and repeated it until it looked right. Max stared at their joined hands. Something was wrong. He could feel it crawling at the edges of his mind, but the whiskey smoothed it out, dulled the shape. He told himself maybe she was tired. Maybe she was humoring him, giving up the fight for one night. Maybe he was just drunk and paranoid. But as the laugh track on the screen echoed through the room, Mara leaned closer, her smile too wide, her laughter a half second too late, and Max's chest tightened with the certainty that whatever had shifted between them, it wasn't small. It was something he couldn't name. The sitcom droned on until the sky outside faded to black. Max hardly noticed the episodes blur together. Mara sat with him the entire time, her body angled toward his, her hand sometimes brushing his arm or refilling his glass before he even asked. By the time he shut the television off, the room felt too quiet, the silence pressing in on the walls. I'm heading up, he muttered. Mara rose at once. I'll come with you. Her eagerness made him hesitate, but he nodded. Together they climbed the stairs, their footsteps soft against the old wood. The bedroom was neat, perfectly neat. Mara turned down the covers, smoothed the sheets. Max stripped off his shirt and jeans, leaving them in a heap by the chair. She didn't comment. Normally she would. She hated his clothes lying around. Tonight she only smiled and slipped beneath the covers. Max followed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He lay on his side, staring at the shadowy outline of the dresser. Mara shifted closer, curling against him. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, fingers spread as though to steady him. You're warm, she whispered. He let out a breath. Guess so. She laughed softly, almost to herself. Not loud this time, but the sound still clung to the air too long. Max closed his eyes. The whiskey pulled him downward, heavy and slow. The warmth of the bed, the faint smell of Mara's hair, the rhythmic creak of the house. It should have been comfort. But as he drifted, he felt the unease coil tighter. Mara's breathing beside him was even, steady, but somehow it didn't sound right, like someone mimicking the rise and fall of sleep. He told himself he was drunk. He told himself not to think. Sleep came anyway. Sometime in the night, Max stirred. The room was dark, the kind of deep dark that seemed to thicken the air. He blinked, trying to orient himself. His mouth was dry, his throat raw. A shape stood at the side of the bed. Mara. She was motionless, her outline faint against the dim light seeping through the blinds. She stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly down, as though watching him. Max's pulse thudded. His voice scraped out rough. "Mara." She didn't answer. A moment passed, then another. Finally, she leaned down, pressed her lips lightly against his forehead, and whispered, "Go back to sleep." Her breath was cool against his skin. Max lay frozen until she moved away, slipping back under the covers beside him. Her body curled into his, her breathing settling into that same steady rhythm. He stared into the dark, wide awake, the sound of her quiet humming just barely threading through the silence. Max lay stiff on the mattress, Mara's breathing soft beside him. The whisper still clung to his forehead like a damp mark. His chest ached with each beat of his heart. He waited, eyes wide, staring into the dark. Minutes stretched. Mara didn't move. Her rhythm stayed steady, too steady, as though she were demonstrating the act of sleep instead of falling into it. Max's mouth was dry. His throat burned for something familiar. Careful not to wake her, though part of him suspected she wouldn't stir anyway, he slipped from the bed. The floorboards creaked under his weight, each sound sharp in the hush of the house. He paused once, glancing back. Mara hadn't shifted. Her shape lay curled beneath the blankets, her face turned toward the wall. Max padded down the stairs. The air grew cooler in the hallway, carrying the faint smell of wood and dust. In the kitchen, the clock above the stove glowed 2:17 in sickly green numbers. The bottle sat waiting on the counter, cap off, glass beside it, clean. He frowned. He was almost certain he'd left it in the living room earlier. Or maybe Mara had taken it upstairs. But here it was, as though it had been waiting for him all along. His hands worked before his mind could catch up. The whiskey sloshed into the glass, golden and thick in the low light. He drank deep, the fire racing down his throat, spreading warm numbness through his chest. The silence pressed closer around him. The hum of the refrigerator filled the edges of the room, steady and cold. Max refilled the glass, sat at the table, stared at the pale yellow walls, the shadows stretching long and thin. Upstairs, the house shifted faintly. Wood groaned. Maybe it was just the settling. Maybe it was her. He drank again, chasing the thought down into the burn. One glass blurred into another. By the time his head sank into the cradle of his arms, the bottle was a third lighter, and the house was quiet once more. Max woke with a start, his neck stiff and his arm numb beneath his head. The kitchen was pale with early light, the kind that seeped weakly through curtains rather than poured. His glass still rested in his hand, tipped but unspilled, amber liquid catching the glow. He set it down carefully, rubbing his eyes. His mouth tasted of ash and metal. The bottle on the counter stood open, a quiet accusation. Upstairs, The house was silent. Max pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. His legs felt leaden as he moved toward the sink. He splashed cold water on his face, gripping the edge of the counter until the chill steadied him. When he turned, something caught his eye on the carpet near the table. Indentations, 2 of them, side by side, pressed deep into the fibers, the shape unmistakable. Bare feet, small, toes pointed forward. They stood exactly where his head had rested through the night. Max froze. He blinked hard, leaned down, ran his fingers over the depressions. The carpet was still warm beneath his touch, as though someone had only just moved away. His pulse thudded in his ears. He straightened, staring at the prints. The memory of Mara standing by the bed clawed its way back, sharp as glass. The tilt of her head, the whisper, the silence. Max licked his lips, forced a laugh. "Carpet's old," he muttered. "Old shapes." He stepped around the indentations, moving toward the stairs. He didn't look back. Upstairs, Mara lay curled beneath the covers, her breathing slow and even. She stirred when he entered, blinking up at him with a soft smile. "Morning," she whispered. Max hesitated, his eyes lingering on her face. She looked peaceful, untouched by the night, as though she'd been asleep the whole time. "Morning," he answered. His voice cracked in his throat. She reached for his hand. "Sit with me a while." He let her fingers close around his, but as he sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes kept drifting toward the window, to the pale light spilling across the floor, as if it might explain away the marks in the carpet downstairs. It didn't. The drive to work was quiet, the car engine thrumming under him like a pulse. The streets were empty, the early morning mist clinging to the edges of buildings. Max kept his hands tight on the wheel, knuckles pale, thinking about the night before, the glass still wet in his memory, the indentations in the carpet. He told himself it didn't matter. It never did. He parked in the lot, slipped inside the building, and immediately transformed. Max's office was small and lined with file cabinets that smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. A calendar hung crookedly on the wall. A clock ticked steadily, too loud in the empty room. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter, reaching beneath it for the small flask he always carried. The liquid sloshed against the steel. By the time his first subordinate arrived, Max's face was calm, measured. No traces of last night's whiskey, no tremor in his voice. "Good morning," he said, eyes flicking to the paperwork stacked on the desk. "Sit. Start with the Henderson file. I want those numbers recalculated by 10:30. Double check every line." The employee flinched. Max didn't soften. "I don't care how many times you've done it before. I want it right. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the employee said, swallowing hard. "Good." Max leaned back, sipping coffee from his paper cup, hiding the flask beneath the desk. His eyes scanned the rest of the office. Everyone else kept their distance, avoiding him. He preferred it that way. No friends, no small talk, no distractions. Hours passed in a blur of emails, clipped commands, and carefully measured interactions. Every time a coworker approached too closely, Max smiled, nodded, corrected, reprimanded, never letting them glimpse the cracks in his polished exterior. He barked once at a temperature for misfiling a document, making the apology afterwards sound perfunctory. The apology was for appearances only. At his desk, he uncapped the flask, taking a slow sip, letting the burn smooth his thoughts. His eyes flicked to the screen, but saw nothing. Numbers, names, requests. They all blurred together. He swallowed again, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. No one knew. He wasn't drunk, not yet, not enough to stumble, but the edges of his personality were frayed. He could feel the dull anger under the surface, the part of him that never really liked anyone, never really cared about anyone. By noon, he'd ordered 2 employees to redo reports, corrected 3 spreadsheets, and snapped at a temp who had asked a question he considered stupid. He returned to his desk, leaning back in the chair, exhaling sharply. The coffee tasted bitter now, the whiskey waiting beneath the desk, and he drank it anyway. Lunch was alone. He walked to the small kitchenette, poured another drink from the flask, and watched the clock. The office felt colder than home, the walls sharper, the hum of fluorescent lights like an accusation. He wasn't a good person here. Never had been. The control, the rage, the disdain for everyone else, it fit him better than friendship or kindness ever did. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't joke. He didn't even nod unless required. Every smile was calculated, every interaction a performance. The longer the morning went on, the more he realized he liked it. The anonymity of power, the ability to decide who got what, who lived or died by the deadlines he set. And yet, the house and Mara lingered in his mind. That strange calm, the laughter too loud, the standing in the dark. He pushed it down, buried it beneath another sip. Another order shouted across the room. Another spreadsheet slammed into a pile. By mid-afternoon, Max's phone buzzed once, an automated email reminder from the building. Time for your scheduled break. He ignored it, taking the call to refill his flask. Alone, unobserved, he allowed himself a brief grin. The whiskey tasted like control, and for the first time since morning, he felt alive. But even as he leaned back, he couldn't shake the faint trace of last night's impressions, the indentations in the carpet, the whisper on his forehead. He told himself it was nothing. Nothing but imagination. Nothing but routine. He told himself he would go home and continue the day as he always did, ignoring what he couldn't understand, drinking what he didn't deserve, living in the quiet hypocrisy that kept everything together. Because if he stopped, even for a moment, he knew he might see just how hollow it all really was. The afternoon dragged slowly, measured by the hum of fluorescent lights and the tick of the wall clock. Max moved through the office like a man holding a knife at the ready. Every interaction was sharp, deliberate. "Recalculate the numbers for the Barrett file," he barked at a clerk. "I don't care if you've done it before. I want it right this time." The clerk flinched, nodded quickly. Max didn't soften. He didn't need to. This was theater, but the audience was everyone's fear. He thrived in it. He returned to his desk, unclipped the small flask hidden beneath the drawer, and took a measured sip. The burn spread warmth down his throat. It reminded him of control, of survival. A temp approached, folder in hand, eyes uncertain. "Sir?" "Do I look like I have time for questions?" Max snapped. His voice was dry, clipped. "Figure it out yourself. And when it's wrong, don't bring it back to me. Fix it before you reach my desk." The temp nodded and backed away, shoulders hunched. Max let out a breath and sipped from the flask again, feeling the tight coil of tension in his chest ease. No one here knew him. They didn't know about the nights spent passed out on the couch, the bottles tucked in corners, the whispers of his wife in the dark. They only knew the mask, precise, angry, unyielding. He barked instructions at 2 more employees. corrected spreadsheets with surgical precision, and scolded a temp for misfiling. Each time, he smiled afterward, only the smallest lift of the mouth, but it never reached his eyes. Performance, pretending he had to. By 3 o'clock, Max's office felt colder, the fluorescent hum sharper. He leaned back in his chair, uncapped the flask, and let himself sip once more. He imagined Mara's smile from last night, the faint hum, the way her hands had been folded neatly while she watched him sleep. He told himself it didn't matter. He'd dealt with enough things that didn't matter. And yet, the faint memory prickled, that stillness, that careful, precise attention. He shook his head. Focus, work, nothing else mattered here. The rest of the afternoon passed in the same fashion. Terse orders, forced smiles, clandestine sips from the flask, the occasional harsh word to remind everyone he was in charge. No one approached him to chat. No one lingered. Max preferred it this way. Friends were a liability, companionship a threat. Trust, don't get him started on that. By 5, he packed up quickly, leaving a stack of partially complete files for the morning. The office was emptying, and he walked out briskly, blending into the evening shadows. He checked the flask in his coat pocket. Enough for the night. The drive home was quiet. Max let his mind wander over nothing and everything. The house awaited. Mara waited. Something waited. Something always waited. And he was tired already. The front door clicked behind him. The house smelled faintly of the evening. Warm wood, the faint tang of last night's whiskey, and the subtle, almost imperceptible sweetness of something Mara had been cooking. Max shrugged off his coat, dropping the keys onto the table. He glanced around the living room. It was exactly as he had left it that morning. Couch cushions in place, television off. The small pile of books still stacked on the side table. The house breathed quietly around him, steady and still. "Hey," he called, his voice rough from the day. No answer. Mara emerged from the kitchen, her robe folded neatly at the waist, hair pinned up just so. She smiled at him, and the edges of it were too precise, too rehearsed. She held a mug of coffee in both hands. "You're home early," she said softly. "Yeah," he muttered, dropping onto the couch. Traffic was light. She moved closer, sitting on the armrest, the mug resting on her lap. Her eyes didn't waver from his face, too steady, too calm. The silence stretched for a moment longer than it should have. "You look tense," she said. "I'm fine," he replied, though the flask in his coat pocket seemed suddenly heavier, reminding him he hadn't touched it all day. Mara tilted her head slightly, a gesture that should have been tender but felt off. She laughed, a small, deliberate sound at the corner of her mouth. Too precise, too contained. It lingered in the room like a note held just a moment too long. "Funny," he muttered, half smiling. "I didn't think you'd laugh at me after the week I've had." Her smile deepened. Not entirely wrong, but just wrong enough. "I always laugh at you," she said. The words were calm, almost clinical, yet familiar. Max set the keys on the table and rubbed at his forehead. The weariness of the day pressed down on him. He thought about the office, the way he barked orders, the way he had sipped the flask under the desk, the thin veneer of civility he had worn so carefully. He thought about the quiet, precise presence of Mara, the way she had been this morning, the way she had been every morning lately. "Coffee," she offered, setting the mug in front of him. He took it, let the warmth wash over his hands, then drank. The flavor was bitter, familiar, grounding. He could almost forget the small, gnawing unease that clung to the edges of his mind. Almost. Evening stretched on in muted light. Max wandered from the living room to the kitchen, pouring himself a small measure from the bottle he kept tucked in the back of the cupboard. Mara didn't comment. She hummed quietly from the other room, a note just slightly flat. Max felt the familiar wash of relief, the burn down his throat, and the dull weight of guilt. When he finally headed to bed, the house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythm of Mara's soft breathing. He collapsed onto the mattress, pulling the covers over him. Mara didn't move immediately, sitting at the edge of the bed just a moment too long, hands folded, watching him. Her presence was calm, precise, but in that stillness, Max felt the faint stirrings of discomfort, the sense that she had been there for hours, waiting, unmoving. He turned away, letting his eyes close. The burn in his chest reminded him that he was still alive, that he was in control, that the quiet wrongness of the house, the precision in Mara's movements, didn't matter. Sleep came slowly. The day ended like so many others, with the bottle half empty, the house still, and Mara silent, perfect, wrong, watching somewhere beyond the veil of perception. The days bled together, each one flavored with the same bitter edge of whiskey. In the mornings, Max still rose with the alarm, dragging himself into the dull motions of work. He shaved, buttoned his shirt, and drowned the hangover with bitter coffee. But he stopped glancing in Mara's direction. He stopped looking for her smile, because the smile was wrong now, too wide sometimes, too sharp at the corners. And when she laughed at his offhand remarks, it was with a precision that felt rehearsed, like someone learning how laughter should sound, not someone who felt it. By the second morning, he'd noticed she had stopped telling him not to drink. In fact, she poured for him, quietly, without comment. A full glass waiting for him when he came home, the burn of whiskey greeting him like an old friend. "Rough day?" she'd ask, and her tone was soft, but the words carried no warmth, just repetition. He would grunt and take the glass, sinking into it. At work, he found the effort of civility slipping. The mask cracked. His barked orders became shouts. He was sharper, crueler, more careless. Colleagues kept their distance. Nobody asked if he was all right. They didn't care, and he preferred it that way. At night, Mara lingered. She'd stand in the doorway longer than she should, watching him drink, watching him stumble. Her silence stretched into something heavier than judgment, heavier than love. On the fourth night, he woke on the couch, empty bottle rolling on the carpet. He thought he heard her humming in the kitchen. The sound was steady, unbroken, like a machine. He closed his eyes against it. By the fifth day, he stopped hiding the bottles. There was no point. She never protested. She simply placed another full glass in his hand when the last one ran dry. Her face was calm, patient, too patient. Something shifted in him then, something ugly and old that he had always pressed down at work, with friends, with her. He no longer tried to explain himself, no longer tried to smile or soften his edges. He barked at her once, sharp, bitter words slurred with drink. She didn't flinch. She only tilted her head, as though considering him, as though learning him. By the sixth night, he didn't sleep in their bed. He stayed on the couch, whiskey in hand, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan that spun lazily in the dark. He thought about how much easier it was this way. No hiding, no pretending. Not from her, not anymore. The house grew quieter with each passing day, The laughter too loud, the smiles too sharp, the bottles piling higher, the words harsher, both of them letting the disguises slip, little by little, until the performance no longer mattered. By the end of the week, Max had stopped pretending he still loved the woman in the house, and Mara had stopped pretending to be her. By the 7th day, Max barely recognized the house. Not for any physical change, everything remained as it always had, but for the way it felt. Stillness hung in the rooms like stale smoke. The house listened now. He came home later than usual, drunk already, stumbling through the door. Mara was waiting in the kitchen, her hands folded neatly on the table, her gaze fixed on nothing. She looked up only when he entered, her smile blooming a second too late, as if delayed by thought. Rough day? The same question, the same calm cadence. He snorted, reaching for the bottle she had already placed out. The cork was gone. The glass beside it gleamed in the dim light, half filled. He didn't bother asking how she knew. She watched him drink. Her eyes didn't move from his face, not even when he shifted, not even when he swore under his breath. She just stared, unblinking, as if his slurred anger and muttered curses were something she was meant to study. When he finally barked, "What?" she tilted her head, her lips twitching. "You're funnier when you're angry," she said, her voice soft, even tender. But she didn't laugh this time. She only kept looking at him, her mouth opening just slightly, as though tasting the silence. Max poured another. He didn't answer. That night he woke again, this time not on the couch, not at the table, but in his bed. His throat was raw, his chest tight. He turned his head and saw Mara sitting upright beside him, her body rigid against the headboard, eyes wide open. She didn't blink when he stirred. "Mara," his voice cracked. She smiled. Her teeth caught the faint glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds. "You were dreaming," she whispered. He swallowed, though his mouth was dry. What was I dreaming about?" "You were calling me," she said, with certainty, as though she had been inside the dream with him. Over and over, he stared at her. Her face was calm, patient, almost proud. "I don't remember," he muttered, rolling away from her, dragging the blanket with him. He lay rigid, back to her, until sleep came again, like a hammer. Over the next days, her wrongness deepened. She stood too still when he entered a room, as if she'd been waiting for him for hours. She spoke less, smiled more, but the smiles were hollow, stretched taut across her face. Once, when he dropped a glass in the sink, it shattered against the basin. He cursed, clutching his hand. Mara was at his side instantly, not walking, not rushing, but there, her fingers brushing his wrist. Too cold, too fast. "You should be more careful," she said. Her tone was flat, almost scolding, but her mouth split into a wide grin as she spoke. He yanked his hand back. Blood welled at his palm. That night, she hummed again in the kitchen. The same steady note, rising and falling like the whir of an engine. He didn't go in. He stayed in the living room, drinking until the sound blurred into the walls. By the 10th day, Max stopped pretending he was fine. He drank at work, he drank in the car, he drank before bed. And Mara no longer pretended to disapprove, or even to comfort. She only watched, smiling faintly, as if the alcohol wasn't rotting him but feeding something in her. Something that was finally done hiding. Max never went back to work. The first day he didn't show, his phone rang until the battery died. By the 3rd, nobody called anymore. By the 5th, he had forgotten the number altogether. The silence suited him. His world shrank to the house, the couch, the bottles that clinked together like broken bells in the trash. He no longer bothered with glasses. Just the neck of the bottle, tilted, the fire sliding down his throat until it dulled everything. Mara was always there. At first she asked him questions. If he wanted food, if he wanted to lie down, if he was cold. But soon she stopped pretending those things mattered. She simply hovered nearby, her eyes never leaving him. Sometimes she stood in the corner, body rigid as a shadow, her head tilted in that too patient way. Other times, she sat close, her face inches from his, smiling as he swayed in and out of drunken sleep. Once, half dreaming, he whispered, "You're not Mara." She smiled wider. "But I'm here." And he let it be. The house fell into ruin. Dishes piled, the sink clogged, the trash overflowed. Max stopped cleaning, stopped shaving, stopped bathing. His skin went grey, his lips cracked. The air reeked of whiskey and sweat, of rot seeping into the walls. And still she stayed, quiet and unblinking. Some nights he woke to find her sitting on the edge of the couch, her hand on his chest, her fingers pressed just over his heart. Not pressing, not hurting, just feeling, listening. He would push her away weakly, muttering curses, but she always returned. Other nights, he opened his eyes to see her standing in the hallway, her body silhouetted in the dark, watching, always watching. He tried once, in a rare moment of clarity, to leave. He staggered to the door, keys in hand, heart pounding. But when he pulled it open, she was already there, standing on the threshold, blocking the way. Her face was blank, her smile gone. "You don't need to go anywhere," she whispered. And the truth was, he didn't. He closed the door, dropped the keys, reached for the bottle. Time blurred. Days, weeks, he no longer counted. He couldn't remember what her voice used to sound like. Couldn't remember what he had ever loved. The woman he'd married was gone, replaced by this quiet thing that fed on him without touching him, that grew stronger the weaker he became. And he let it, because there was no fight left in him, because in some twisted way, he felt seen. One night, sprawled on the couch, bottle cradled in his arms, Max looked up at her. She stood over him, her head tilted, her smile soft and endless. Her eyes shimmered in the dim light, too wide, too dark. "Stay with me," she whispered. His lips cracked into something like a smile. He raised the bottle in a toast. "Always," he slurred. And then he closed his eyes. The house was silent, but for his ragged breathing, the slow drip of a leaking faucet, and the steady hum of something watching, waiting, and feeding. Not love, not hate, just forever.